as I started to say, I don't know what we're doing, but we're doing it.
We'll see where it takes us. Hey, John.
Hi, Natalie. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Or I could call you Natalia.
Oh,
Um,
a lot of people call me Natalia
yep,
because that's a hard T and they assume Russian, and I'm
yep,
not Russian.
yep. Natalie, Natalie.
Natalie.
I caught that last week, and I was like, well, never mind. I'm just gonna let it go.
I'm used to it. It happens a lot.
I I bastardize it into English and just go with Natalie and don't even necessarily do the hard T all that often. But that one I was like, Natalia,
Natalie's fine.
no,
I'll answer
no.
to that. I'll answer to Nat, as well. So
Hey,
whatever.
you
Yeah.
lady over there in the yellow hat.
Hey.
That's my favorite way. Hey, hey. Kevin's like, please don't accost people with just hey by yelling at them across the. I'm like,
We're
but
horses,
it
man.
works.
Everybody responds to
I
hey.
was like, don't knock it if it works. We have some really good friends we've made because I did that.
That's right. Hey, especially when you don't remember their first names.
Yep. The other property that I own across town, that's how I actually ended up making friends with the family that's two houses over,
The
is
neighbors, yeah.
because the husband and his daughter were out in the street and she was roller skating. I didn't know his name, and I wanted to ask him about Halloween to know like how it all worked whenever we first got up here. And so I was like, "Hey, you!" And he turned around, he looked at me, and he was like, "Me?" And I was like, "Yeah, you." And he was like, "Hey, really?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know your name, so for right now, you're just hey you."
Just own it.
Yep. And now we're really good
You're,
friends.
you're from Texas. That's what happens.
I know. I tried to find things to replace howdy, and apparently it just became hey you.
Howdy. Yes.
So
Oh,
anyhow, that's neither here nor there. But we are back to give everybody kind of a recap of the past few episodes. We've had some amazing interviews with some amazing women. Um, and this is not necessarily by design. It could possibly be by design, and I'm just subconsciously doing it. But so far, all of our interviews have been female beekeepers, and
yeah.
I
I
think
didn't
that's
realize
really
that.
awesome. It shows the fortitude that goes into this and everything that they put into it, and how anybody can do anything they want to. Gender is irrelevant, people. Um, there's some amazing women beekeepers out
Well, and
there.
there's
So
there's a lot of creativity and a lot of hardcore business skills as well. So
right.
that's interesting.
Right. And so we've tried to show you a couple of different aspects. And I want to point out too, the individuals who have been on the show that do actually own businesses and sell products. So for instance, Tracy Peelmeyer that has the Hive Butler, and
Mhm.
then just recently Peggy DeSanto who did the Hive Hugger.
Right?
Those individuals did not ask us if they could be on the show. We actually sought them out.
Right.
No advertising, nothing like that. It was literally just here is an amazing example of an individual who started off with an idea, built a
Mhm.
business, and is successful at it. And if we
And I would,
share that,
yeah, I would put Tucka Seville in it too. She was a queen producer. She
she
is
is,
a queen
yeah, she
producer.
is a queen producer. That is true. I just, for Tucka, I love Tucka, and that fits perfectly in with just beekeeping, right? Like
Right.
she is selling a product, but that product is the bees.
Hmm.
Whereas these others were like physical things that you could do if you
That's
wanted
right.
to add into your Langstroth world, kind of scenario. So
Side things.
yeah, hive accessories per
Right.
se. And you know that we talk a lot about less is more. You don't necessarily need these kinds of
Yes.
things, but it
Yes.
is great to be able to see how these individuals have, again, taken just a concept and turned it into a business that also shows you a beekeeping business doesn't necessarily have to be I have 100 colonies and I'm selling this and doing that. It can be bee adjacent to where it helps the beekeeping community and you can grow from there. So the other interview that we had was with Gemma Astley from Homestead Hens and Honey, and Gemma is a great friend of the show.
Hmm.
And I will shout out Gemma just so you know. We did have a couple of listeners reach out. Specifically, Mike definitely reached out and said we need a Higgins update because we did mention Higgins, the little rock star turtle in there, tortoise, and
Aw.
so everybody's curious how Higgins is doing. So But yeah, so we just wanted to touch base with everybody, kind of go through some of the things that we took away from those episodes, and just do a little high level overview of them. So we'll go back and we'll just kind of go in order. So the first one was our interview with Tracy,
Hmm.
and that interview was just Tracy and I. That was unfortunately when you were off running around overseas.
In Europe
And I
somewhere.
say unfortunately because I didn't get to go and you did, so it's more of a
I
jealousy
know.
factor.
That sometimes,
Hey, I got another ad. I only have a year left, or less than a year, to figure this out. I got another ad where some of those Italian villas and some of the Swiss Alps places are like
Mhm.
compensating people to move there, but you got to be 45 or less. And I'm like, man, I'm running out of time. Like, I got to pack my bags.
That's right. They want young people to
They
to
want young
just
people, yeah.
inject new blood into the towns.
Yep,
Yes.
they want to revitalize it. They want people that are younger, that are going to be starting families, that will live there. And the way things are going in the world today, it keeps sounding more and more like a great idea.
Yeah, let's not get into that, but I totally agree with you.
I mean, I am willing to sell everything I own, move
Yep,
overseas, open up a bakery, raise bees and chickens, and contribute to the community.
that's right. Do that in the country somewhere in Europe. Yeah.
That's right. In just a little villa, it'll be great. I think it'll be wonderful. And then next time you run away to go overseas, you can come visit.
Come and visit. It'll be a little bit
We'll have a
further
room for you.
away.
You might have to do some chores while you're here, but we'll have a room for you.
That's okay. I can do beekeeping camps and help
Hey,
us,
there you go.
whatever.
There you
Yeah.
go. We can put on overseas seminars.
We're planning on doing traveling workshops. I think I mentioned it before, so I'm totally game in doing that in
Yeah,
Europe
that
at some.
that made me pretty envious because one of the ones you and I were talking about was on an island. And I was
Hmm.
like, "Oh my god, that would be awesome. How can I figure out how to make that work? Like I need to
Right.
go."
That's right. So,
So anyhow, sorry, that was I got on the tangent on that one. So on Tracy's interview, we talked a lot about the business aspects of things, but we also talked about some beekeeping aspects. And one of the things that was kind of a common thread through all three of those episodes was the aspect of treating. And that's not something that we necessarily talk a lot about on the podcast, in especially, in the day to day kind of context of it. We do talk about the pros and cons, and we talk about a lot of alternatives to that. But those three episodes, those individuals, that is their beekeeping style or things that they are considering or looking at. And so that is one thing that we obviously went really deep in on the Tracy episode. And that one was kind of there was some shock value to the description that was actually used for sure about the concept of treating versus not treating. It does kind of remind me, we did a couple of episodes about, I think the one that probably would be the closest would be um, treatment versus vaccination, or immunization versus vaccinate. There was like,
I remember that one.
yeah, we
Yeah.
did an episode a while back where it was those two things, and we kind
Right.
of talked about the differences between those. And that would be something definitely to go back and listen to if you want to understand the concept and the difference between the two things. Getting a booster shot, getting a vaccine, or changing your DNA, those are all radically different things.
Well, and I mean, comparing, mammals to insects, first of all, and on top of that, honeybees, which are completely different kind of insects. That's one of the most complex organisms on the planet when it comes to social organization and the way to do things, including extreme polyandry, including epigenetics, that, the environment kind of helping them change the way they do things and how they're physiology changes and what happens turning on and off genes based on what's happening in the environment, including mind pressure, including turning into queens and all stuff. So, and combine that with the faster life cycles of the individual generations of bees, when we compare, when we say, oh, well, it's like you have a dog and you would treat it for fleas. And that's the same thing with bees. It's like comparing apples to whales. Absolutely, completely different. No, not even a connection there. besides the fact that personally I don't treat my dogs with pesticides, I have had my neighbors lose cats to pesticides for fleas. And if I do anything, I'll put some DE, some mechanical intervention. But for the most part, my dogs, if they're outside, if they have fleas, that's kind of what happens. They're not going to die from it, first of all. So there's a lot of inequivalencies and just false, comparisons that are going on when we compare mammals to insects and especially honeybees. So
Yeah.
from that standpoint, that's would be my observation.
So I I don't know. I'm trying to come up with in my head a way that would be a better analogy. And I think that you could try to draw a correlation between a honeybee colony and a mammal only if that mammal also lived in a social structure. So
Yes.
if you looked at primates, if you looked at humans, and then you start adding in environmental factors, because what you're talking about is adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
And these things that live in a social structure have the ability to adapt. And they also have other members of their society who can help them. So when we talk about like hygienic behavior, part of that
Mm-hmm.
is the other bees grooming each other, not necessarily grooming themselves, but grooming each other. Primates do that out there in the wild. They actually go through and they pick parasites off of each other, and when a new thing is introduced to any society,
Mm-hmm.
there is a period of change and adaptation that has to occur. And if you don't allow the stresses of that to go through and happen, then the adaptation doesn't happen. And you're constantly stuck with here's the
There you
problem.
go.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you think in terms of pressure, that's what's driving natural selection. And the honeybee organism is super adapted to locally, fit in their environment and also react to the pressure of pests and pathogens. They're fantastic at adapting to things. And a lot of that stuff is somewhere encoded in their genetics, right? And that's where the epigenetics, when the pressure arises, it kind of tends to turn on genes. Mammals don't do that. Not like this, right? So that's completely different. Even if you had a society of mammals that would help each other like humans, that's kind of what we do, but you still can't change the genes really fast or to adapt like we couldn't again with the viruses or whatever. It's really hard for our mammal bodies to adapt right away and to adapt really fast. Our immune system might be more able to do that, but it has to be exposed to things, right? So
Right.
from the standpoint of the pest, if your goal is to destroy and bring the level of pests to zero, you're not helping the bees, right? You're really kind of like taking away an opportunity for them to grow and adapt and become more resilient. Yes, there's an initial period where it takes a toll, but over time and very quickly, within 3 something years, it turns around and you have Puerto Rico, for example, or South Africa and other regions of the world. We've talked about it many times over the episodes of this podcast. But when they don't have access to those pesticides, well, the colonies of honeybees initially kind of like struggle, but very quickly they will self-select for fitness and find some of those genes will get turned on and they will be able to fend off those pests on their own. And they're much more resilient year to year after that.
That is true. And so that kind of, well, I lost. There was a segue in there for just like a split second,
For
and
a
I was like,
split
"Oh, this is
second,
like
and
a
I
perfect
went,
segue," and then all of a sudden, like I blinked and it was gone. That's how my week's gone. So
sorry.
the one aspect of it was like for me, for instance, you and I were talking off the air about how at the moment I've been working for 3 years now on rebuilding the apiary, and I have not had a lot of success thanks to external factors, some of which are
Right.
very large and hairy and
Yes.
and out of my control. And this year, unfortunately, it feels like that aspect is closing in. There has been a mom and a couple of cubs, plus
Oh,
a separate solitary bear sighted within a mile radius of 3 of my colonies on numerous occasions over the past 2 months. And I'm like, that's not cool. It's to the point where everybody is now on alert. If you go out there by the preserve, you have to have a
Right.
can of bear spray and things with you. Don't go alone if you don't have to, kind of thing. And
Right.
so like they're in the area they pass through, but this year there seems to be a lot. So far I haven't lost any hives to them, but that was the problem to begin with.
Right.
But the conversation was that I have struggled every year with the bees either not making it through the winter, not even making it to winter in some cases, not making it through the winter, and not doing well. And now this year, we made colonies actually survived and made it through the winter. We accomplished that, but now we're having problems with queens, and we're trying to do the next generation, and the queens aren't coming back. And a lot of that is because all of the bees that are up here are treated bees.
Mm-hmm.
I don't treat my bees. So I am fighting this uphill battle of the colonies are trying to adapt. They're trying to find the genetics that work. And so far, it is definitely an uphill battle, and I'm losing more than I'm gaining ground on this. But it is one of those things that once you make it to the top of that hill and you
Right.
get the genetics in place that can do it, well, then it starts to smooth back out. And that was something that Les had even said at one point in time. He was like, if you converted your entire operation over, you're going to lose the majority of them for a few years. And
Mm-hmm.
then after 2 to 3 years, suddenly then it starts building back up because
Right.
now those few that did survive year after year, you can split from those and use those genetics. So it can definitely kind of change the way that, you're looking at your beekeeping and what you're doing, how
Right.
you're going through and managing it.
And so it depends on a few things, including what kind of bees you start with. So when you're a beekeeper and you have comb, you can set up swarm traps and find. So we talked about in one episode how there's like
Three
two
times
to
the
three
amount of feral
times
colonies.
more wild bees than managed bees, and they're actually faring probably better because otherwise there wouldn't be so many. And so right there, it's a big giveaway that they do better without those treatments because they've let natural selection take place. But if you catch some of
unless
that,
unless the swarm you catch happens to have a queen with a dot on her back. That's a different
yeah, that's
scenario.
a little different. You kind of know, but just kind of play the game and see if they do well. I think that what happens too is when you have a apiary that's brand new, the first couple 3 years are the most challenging ones until you have colonies that are very well established. Any new colonies that's less than 2 years old, it's a crapshoot, really, right? So whether you treat or not, by the way, and so that's what's difficult at first, getting your bees to survive for a couple of seasons. And once they've got, Les always talks, and we talk about Les a lot tonight. Les always talks about the two-stroke motors, right? So when you have the two-stroke motors, when you go under that certain revving or activity, then it's just kind of it dies, right?
Yep,
That's
petters out.
what first, smaller colonies and more less established colonies do. Once you reach that threshold and you got that revving going on, all of a sudden these go and they're just going. And so in my book, the mites are really a symptom. The problems with mites, because mites are always in all over bees, right? But colonies that suffer from them are mostly not above that threshold. There's a symptom of an underlying problem that's usually linked with a couple of things. The queen that's not as good quality doesn't have good mating, or it's mated with drones that are not necessarily good. And that includes treated drones, by the way. There's Garrett Slater, Dr. Garrett Slater just had a talk about the drones, and he was talking about how unviable and poor drones sperm is a real problem for the spermatheca of the young virgins. And what happens when you treat colonies, your drones suffer, right? So, and then when you cull drone comb, you're making it that much harder for queens in the area to find good mating
Yeah.
potential.
Your colony could
So,
have amazing genetics, but if you don't ever let them raise drones, those
yeah.
genetics are never going to be shared to help benefit any other colonies.
Well, and that extreme polyandry, that mating with an average of 15 plus or minus, depending, that's what gives the colonies the strength they need to be resilient and just fight and just thrive in the presence of pests, right? So they're going to have more ways to get around it and groom and do uncapping, recapping, chewing, infected cells. And there's a fantastic book that I'm reading right now that talks about all this stuff. It's in the UK, but it's like the research is there for, it's true for everybody. It's called the Honeybee Solution to to Varroa. And it's Stephen Riley, I think, wrote that book. I highly recommend it for anybody that wants to make sense out of all of this, right? And so nutrition and queen quality will drive the health of your colony, right? Stressors, especially nutrition, will be the issue and the capacity to react, which is the queen quality. So from that standpoint, mites are not a problem for colonies that are super strong. The virus, their immune system is amazing. They don't really care. They have plenty of bees to take care of grooming and uncapping and hygienic behavior and all the stuff, which means they are not stressed and don't have to split that between their foraging and other optimizations of their system. They can just do it all, right? So part of the issue when you want to be treatment free is to start with good genetics. That means treatment free, natural, Russian or wild bees. And that's kind of the way I look at it. Anytime you do something with treated genetics and you start with that, yes, you're going to have an uphill battle.
So a good example to kind of bring this back to the forefront of everybody's minds. This is not the first time that we've ever dealt with a mite when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
the honeybee.
Right.
So if you rewind back, actually, before the majority of us started beekeeping, there was the tracheomite. And
Right.
when that first showed up, oh my God, the world was over.
Right.
What are we going to do? There was some loss, there was some adaptation that had to go on. There were treatments and things that were put out for that. But rarely do you hear a beekeeper in today's world talk about
No,
tracheomites.
we
But
don't
the
talk
kicker
about it.
is, we didn't eradicate them. They're
No,
still there.
that's right.
They're still a thing. It's just
Mm-hmm.
the bees adapted to where now it is not as detrimental of a relationship or a parasitic relationship. It's more, you can't really say symbiotic because the bee's not necessarily getting anything out of it. However,
In
there is a
balance.
type of mite that is a symbiotic
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote parasite to the bee. And that's one of them that's really interesting because it typically lives on bumblebees, but it
Right.
once it makes it into the colony, it actually does a lot of the housekeeping inside the colony, and it does not feed off of the bee or the larva, and it doesn't necessarily spread any disease. So there are ways in nature that nature will find a balance and everything will work out. So just keep that in mind because at some point down the road, we will probably not be talking about varroa mites at all. We're going to be
No,
talking about AAA labs.
exactly. And the same principles apply to their arrival. I'm not afraid. I know there might be some dips initially, but the bees are they've been so the arguments that the bees have been here for millions of years, hundred something millions of years. They've gone through they haven't needed us. They've gone through stuff, and they've had things they've had to adapt to. And that's what nature does, right? So you make a good point on the other organisms that are in a colony of honeybee. There's the pseudoscorpions, there's the other mites that are much smaller that we never talk about. And so when you put miticides, you're disrupting the ecosystem. It's like throwing off your gut microbiome,
Yeah, that's
right?
true. When you take antibiotics, you're
Yeah,
killing the good and the bad, and it's indiscriminate. And then, unfortunately, the bad is easier to replicate, and it
right.
takes more work to get the good in there. So you
Yeah.
throw
And I
everything
hate
out of balance.
Yeah, and I hate to compare, mammal things and whatever to anthropomorphizing colonies and all this stuff is always a slippery slope. And but that's a good way to think about it. Yes.
I've decided that since how everything is sentient and conscious, it's okay to give human characteristics to all of it.
Okay, speaking of sentence, exactly, you're right. Because who was it that was a friend of mine in Wisconsin that was saying that he has with his own eyes witnessed bees rescuing a honeybee that was fallen into the syrup he was feeding them. And they actually banded together and help her out of the syrup. And
Yeah.
if that doesn't mean conscious and sentience, I don't know what does.
Right. Because if it's just an autonomous object or
Yeah.
creature that is like eat, sleep,
They couldn't
bleep,
care less.
repeat,
If
they
they're
wouldn't care if somebody
disposable,
was drowning. It wouldn't matter. Yeah.
yeah, if they're disposable and they're just units and cogs in the machine and it doesn't matter, they don't have a conscience, that wouldn't be how they behaved.
That's true. That is very true. Some of the other aspects that we touched on it with not so much really with Tucka. With Tucka, we did talk about some genetics. We talked more about the challenges of what it's like being an urban beekeeper or a backyard beekeeper versus a commercial beekeeper. And she's always been extremely natural beekeeping,
Mm-hmm.
more extreme than what we normally would talk about, even with the way that she started off. And
Right.
now she is faced with the challenge of, do I treat, because I'm doing this commercial operation and I'm using commercial type of equipment,
She's doing
do I
honey
do that?
production.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's doing honey production, bee production, contract work. And she's like, do I do this? She's not doing it at the moment. But the
Mm-hmm.
question is this a route or an avenue that I have to take? Do I have to start behaving like a commercial beekeeper in order to maintain the numbers that I need to fulfill these contracts? Because you can't, unfortunately, once you're into that cog wheel mechanism of corporate everything, you can't afford to lose 2/3 of your colonies and wait 3 years for them to rebound. So
That's a tough one.
yeah, that is definitely a challenging kind of perspective. But the takeaway from that too, though, was something that we talked about, and I talked about it early on in the show a long time ago. It ultimately boils down to a personal choice, a conscious choice, and a
Yes.
financial choice for each individual beekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
So if you only have one colony and you are terrified that that colony is going to die and your only option is to treat that colony to get it through the winter, that's what you got to do. If it's, if you don't have the money to necessarily do it, okay. Are there other things and solutions? Yeah, possibly so. But you have to decide what you're comfortable with and what fits your scenario. And
Yeah.
then, that's kind of how you move forward with that.
I'm kind of at a boat that, yes, commercial is different, although it could be considered commercial. I'm just not migratory and I don't do a whole lot of honey production. So from that standpoint, I'm not using my bees as units of productions, just as units, numbers on properties. And I do not want to lose them either. And as a matter of fact, we're at 5% on overwinter, over year-to-year losses, right? So it does work even at that level, depending on what you're doing. There's a lot of commercial operations that cannot do what we're doing because their business model is completely different, right? My take on the one colony, you can't afford to lose it, is if you're worried about your financial investment, start with bees that are better quality to start with, because now you're spending money, time, and energy treating inferior genetics that are probably not going to get any better and get any better survival than treatment free, naturally resilient Russians, whatever that you could get, right? So it's a false hope, and you're still going to lose them at the same rate. So my big thing is that the treatments do not protect you from losing your bees. Bees die, and it's not a silver bullet, right? So if you're really short on money, let them, first of all, pick your bees a little bit more judiciously. Don't buy bees that are treated. They're not as resilient. They're not as strong, and they are less likely to make it from one year to the other. Second of all, whatever bees you have, they're still going to build comb for you, which means you're going to be more able to attract swarms the year afterwards and to grow your other colonies later. It's not a complete loss either. But when you treat, you typically contaminate your comb and your nest, right? So that comb that you have now, you might consider kind of what happens with that. Also, it tends to be such a reassuring crutch that people forget to learn about bee biology, and it kind of like obliterates that completely. People forget to look at what's really going on and tuning in with the colonies. So in the end, you're going to be better off financially if you're paying attention to what's going on in your bees and you have better quality bees. That's my take on this.
That's a good take.
Yeah. It's like everything else. You have 20, you have a question and five beekeepers and you're going to get 10
Yeah,
answers.
you're gonna get a lot of different answers.
Just
That's valid.
and when it comes to that, by the way, I'd like to remind everybody to ask what kind of skills those beekeepers that are giving you their opinions are, how long they've been doing it, how many colonies they've been managing throughout their career, what's their styles, what their goals are, because not not all beekeepers' opinions are of equal value.
Value. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah.
So one of the other aspects too that kind of was a carryover theme outside of the treatment aspect of stuff was, we started off when we were talking with Gemma Astley, we were talking about her having a hard time overwintering colonies, and that kind of led into this conversation about the thermal dynamics
Oh
and
yeah.
insulating your hives for winter.
Mm-hmm.
And that then became a natural jumping board for us
Right.
to be able to then pull Peggy into the conversation because you, Natalie, as you were talking to Gemma, you mentioned the hive hugger, and I was
Right.
like, I'm sorry, the what? Like, what is this? I had to go look it up. I had to check it out, and then I was reading down through it, and I was like, you know what? This, instead of like me asking questions to you, we could just have her on the show, and we could go through and we could talk about these aspects of stuff. But it is actually a great thing because Gemma, we talked about the different styles of hives, what works for you and what doesn't. And it's really interesting because sometimes that changes throughout our career, right? Or throughout our
Right.
beekeeping journey and our hobby. I started off as Langstroth. I transitioned over to almost purely top bar. And then I
Mm.
started inheriting Langstroth hives that I
Right.
didn't want, but people just kept giving them to me. And so you can kind of go back and forth, but we talk a lot about, well, if you don't want to do the stackable boxes, but you got all this Langstroth equipment, maybe you
Right.
transition it into a long laying, or
Or a
um,
conversion, an adapter at the end of the
right, you can
top
do the
bar,
conversions
which
on
is
top bars
fun.
and grow them.
That's so fun because you have the best of both worlds, right?
It
Um,
is.
I think that I'm like you. I've got a lot of the top bars, obviously, because that's still my favorite by far. But I've got a lot of Langstroths that are in production, not just in a teaching apiary for demo purposes. And you'll be proud of me. I just bought about $2,000 worth of Langstroth equipment and a
Proud of
big
you,
gigantic
or
extractor.
feel
But
bad for
because
you.
so the calculation was like, there's that big expensive extractor that's in itself is $1,800 that was used 4 times. And then I've got all those boxes. They're already assembled. They're already painted. All the frames are there. And I can do a lot of adapters with that and sell the stuff that I don't want to keep. The telescopic covers are also very expensive. I can use them to cover top bar nukes, which I'm going to do some queen rearing, and so that's going to be perfect. There was a plastic and capping tank that which I was like, oh, I need one of these. And then I'm like, I'm going to resell the Langstroth extractor, and I'm going to basically get, you know, all this stuff for 16 full complete colony Langstroth colonies plus all this other stuff. And I'm going to get all that for $1,000 because I'm going to sell that extractor for $1,000. So you can also do things like that. You might not use all of it, but if you're into the bit, trying to cut your cost and whatever, you have to have a little bit of a market for things when you're selling, though, or know where to sell your stuff. But you can buy bundles and resell for parts and just kind of end up with stuff that doesn't cost you very much. So I'm going to use those Langstroths for a bunch of top bar adapters to be very flexible back and forth.
Yeah, that works. The other thing too, this is off of the recap aspect of it, but what you just said though is one of the other things you can do is if you've got a couple of beekeepers in your area, you guys can all band together and
Yes.
buy a bundle of stuff and then disseminate it between, the group, and everybody benefit, get it for way cheaper than it would have been. You might
Yes.
not need, you know, 50 boxes, but maybe each of you could use a third of that, or
Right.
whatever, however that works. So that is one way, kind of teamwork and effort can make things like that happen. But the one downside though, regardless what you're doing, because I know that Gemma's top bar is not a 2 by thick top bar.
That
And
makes a
obviously,
difference.
all of your Langstroth equipment is going to be the normal quote
Right.
unquote 1 inch, really three quarters of an inch by the time it's all said and done.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a lot of insulative value. And so, are they not making it through the winter because they're getting too cold? Or, if you're wrapping them, then maybe that's not the case. But that kind of led into this whole concept of what we were talking to Peggy about. And
Mm-hmm.
that was some very interesting conversation because
I loved it.
there's a lot of high level stuff in there. We're not going to rehash all of it. You guys can go listen to the
No, but that
episode if you
was
want to
really
get it in there. You can also go find the YouTube video she was talking about. Type in Peggy DeSanto, and you can find videos of her out there, and you'll be able to go through and really listen to her bring the scientific talk down to a more
Accessible
commonplace
level.
level for people
Uh,
to digest. But
And
it's cool because yes, you need to insulate the hives because the bees, we talk about adapting and everything else, they are fantastic at adapting, but it doesn't mean that they should have to in some situations. And in the thermal regulation aspect of it, when we witness a colony in a hive cluster super tight and then we extrapolate that's how they are, that's
yeah,
actually inaccurate. That's how they
that's
are in a Langstroth box. That's not how
and
they are in a
stress,
tree.
and that's how they react to a stress situation. They're actually stressed out. It's actually that research from whichever doctor that was looking at the Langstroth was very clear. It was controversial, and she mentioned that it's just kind of not. It's kind of cruel in a way to put our bees in boxes where they have to resort to that, which is a stress reaction. No, look, it's very simple. The colonies of honeybees are basically taking in energy and spending energy. It's all about the zero sum game and potentially a little bit higher than zero because you want them to get bigger from year to year. That's how they thrive and can cast swarms and reproduce at the colony level the following years. But the point is that yes, they can survive in a I've done it here in by mistake in a 5 frame easy corrugated
Corrugated
plastic
plastic
box
nuke.
with the cutout for the adapter to the top bar hive that was separated from the top bars in the high winds and then the cold and everything. They'll do it, but it doesn't mean that it's good for them, and they will lose ground. They will spend energy trying to stay warm a lot more. Whereas if you save them the extra work and the extra energy expense, they will be that much better off, and they will hit the ground running much earlier and much better if they have not spent all that extra energy, whether it comes to trying to stay warm, trying to stay cool. When you create cross ventilation is not good for them, right? And then trying to just kind of letting them kind of do their thing and be more resilient, learning how to do the grooming and capping and all the stuff, so they don't have to worry about the energetic toll later down the road of the mites for the winter, right? So there's all kinds of things you could do that with.
Well, and one of the other things too is there's a misconception in the mindset that if the bees are cold and they're clustered together, then they're not doing as much expenditure, therefore their food will last longer.
Mm,
And I actually, when I first started beekeeping, I had this fear my very first winter because the bees were it didn't get very cold that winter, and the bees were active
mhm.
all winter long, and they were flying
Yeah,
all winter long. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to starve to death because they're being too busy. They should
yeah,
cluster so they don't do it. But in reality, they do still have to consume the sugar for the
right,
carbohydrate to be able to vibrate. And when they vibrate, what are they doing? They're disengaging the wings, but they're
right,
still shivering those wing muscles as if they
yeah,
were flying. And
right,
so flight is really the big expenditure of energy. And when they're vibrating, they're basically doing the same thing, but
right,
they're not able to move. They're not able to do anything. If there is brood, they've got to do it even more. They've got to raise that temperature. So it's better for them in a tree type cavity or in a simulated cavity where you've got this
isolation,
insulation. They are not that tightly clustered. They're loose. They can wander around. They can still do chores. They can make it to food. And the periods where they might have to tighten up a little bit are fewer and further between and for shorter
yes,
duration. So it's less stress on them. And if they're not flying, just because they're crawling across the comb, doesn't mean they're going to be gorging on food. It's the flight and the
right.
vibration
That's
that
right. Those
trigger
are
that.
high energy intensity demanding activities. But in the day-to-day activities, when they're not rearing brood in the colony and they're just sitting there, even walking around, not clustered, it doesn't consume all that much. They do the same thing in the summer there's in Texas. They'll just hang out
Literally hang out on
and
the front of the hive.
literally hang out and not really go through a whole lot of food because of it. Right?
Yeah. So that is in a nutshell. That is a good recap of all of the things that have transpired over the past 3 or 4 interview episodes that we've done. And they are all fantastic. They are filled with a lot of information. So if for some reason you managed to come across this one, but you haven't heard those, then go back and listen to them in order.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it's
also, but
interesting.
by the same token, if you're listening to this episode and you haven't heard any other episodes, start at 0 and go 1, 2, 3, 4. Work your way up.
Yeah.
That's the better way to actually go through the entire process. But if you like listening to us banter, hey, that's fine too.
Hey, we
So,
should have warned people that at the beginning of this recording that if they haven't listened to those 3 or 4 last episodes, there might be spoiler alerts right
spoiler
there.
alert. Oh well.
Oh well.
It is how it is, I suppose. So, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap this one up for this week's recap for everybody. So we want to say thank you for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. We look forward to talking to everybody next week with another interview out there. But until then, as always, be good, everybody.
And as always, be mindful, everyone. We'll see you then.
This Hive Jive production was made possible by amazing patrons like you, and we appreciate your support. To all our Hive Jive junkies out there, you truly are the bee's knees.